Welcome back to Performance Process, the podcast where we break down some of the processes behind the world's best performances so that you can apply them to your own riding. This week, we're joined once again by our resident anonymous aero whisperer, CyclingSpy, to talk through the latest in performance tech, listener questions, and some, well, I think, spicy Spring Classics observations. We kick things off with a conversation that's been quietly brewing in the background of the World Tour. Why are some teams going all in on aero while others seem to be backing off or falling behind, choosing comfort and control over claimed speed? From cobble chaos to overshoe choices, race suit fabrics, and Colnago's new V5 RS, we dig into the trends, the trade-offs, and the stuff you might not spot unless you're really looking. Then it's on to our listener questions, from aerodynamic role of vortices in helmet design to the use of yarn flow visualization in testing, to whether brake hose riding might be the next marginal gain hiding in plain sight. This one's got a bit of everything: tech theory, race day practicality, and some gentle myth busting along the way. So let's get into it. Spy, welcome to the show again.
No, thanks for having me back.
You sound different.
Second time's a charm.
Yeah, well, this is third time now because we had two bites at the first episode. We got there in the end up. So anybody who gave up on that one part way through, yeah, just double back. We've got an updated version of that podcast there with an easier to with a voice distortion that is easier on the ears. In fact, it's kind of just AI, isn't it? It's not really distortion anymore. It's just somebody else's voice at this point.
Yeah, which is interesting when people are trying to guess inflections in the voice, and so it was not an inflection in my voice, it's imaginary, so good luck.
Yeah, we're here today anyway to talk about the Spring Classics, the Cobble Classics, so to speak. We're recording 2 days after Amstel Gold, so we might get a little bit of Ardennes sneaking into the conversation here, but one thing that really perked my interest there was about 24 hours after Paris-Roubaix, I was somewhere mid-Atlantic on a flight, and you messaged to say that you had just done a calculation and you'd figured out that Gilbert's 2019 winning time at Paris-Roubaix would have been outside the time limit in this year's race. Tell us, what did you look at there, and what did you find other than the obvious?
Yeah, by 4 seconds, so it was pretty close. I mean, as I said in the post, it's a bit clickbaity as a statement, but sort of that's kind of on purpose to get the conversation going. Because some of it is to win direction. I mean, post-COVID, it's always been a tailwind, whereas pre-COVID, it was always a headwind, which there were some conspiracies in the comments of that post that were suggesting things, which was quite funny.
The chemtrails and stuff, or what was
But I think it some of it is, most of it is wind direction. I mean, the 2025 race and the 2019 race, out of the pre and post COVID times, are the two most comparable in terms of wind in that final hour of racing. For the first couple of hours, as people correctly pointed out, the wind was a big advantage in this year's race versus the 2019 one. But I think it's, given how big the difference is, I mean, a winner to be essentially outside the time limit by today's margin only 6 years later is, so there's some progress or some difference there that you can get into, whether it's equipment, whether it's how they're racing, whether it's nutrition. It's probably all of that everyone is talking about all the time. Everyone's talking about it, the pros, us lot. It's just, all racing is faster all the time, and I think a statement like, "Oh yeah, Gilbert would have been outside the time," then is just it really hits home how big the difference is that we're seeing can be.
Yeah, I mean, how they race is going to have a massive impact on this as well. And I remember I'd never been to a Paris-Roubaix before COVID. I've been to everyone since, and there were some years since where the breakaway didn't get established until the first cobbled sector, even if it did get established, and compare that to 10 years ago or so, when a break would go very early on, almost be let go away with no hope of really making it to the finish. But this year's edition was actually somewhere in between that. There was racing for about the first 30 kilometers or so, but then a break was allowed to go, but it never got the massive gap. And so that, tactics, so to speak, will have a huge impact. But I'm kind of wondering, like, if we just lean into the clickbait for a little second here, with those caveats aside, could you put a figure on what kind of a difference we're looking at there, and what's effectively just half a decade? I meant to say equipment wise.
I mean, everything. I mean, I think look in the post, and Gilbert is in a smooth fabric long sleeve jacket. Van der Poel's in a expensive skin suit. You've got much wider tires with everything to go with. Gilbert was on a Roubaix specific bike with spacers underneath his stem. Just all of aside, because I don't want to say marginal gains, but there's just so many incremental things just stacked on top. The differences are massive. I mean, especially on sort of the skin suit side of things. You can going from a smooth sleeved jacket to a full-blown skin suit could be 20-30 watts easily, which is there's a couple of kilometers an hour for free, like really for free as well. So yeah, there's so many differences.
Gilbert was using the S-Works Roubaix, which, the specialized equipped teams, of which there are 3 in the women's peloton and 2 in the men's peloton, don't even use. Still available, but they now use the race bike, the tarmac, because speeds have increased so much over the past few years. And you're okay to say marginal gains, because we're talking about athletes who, maybe in most cases before COVID, but certainly everyone post-COVID, have now maximized all the fundamentals. As you said, they're fueling, hydrating, eating correctly on the bike. They're training, the training has come on in leaps and bounds in recent years as well. And so when we are stacking these marginal gains, for lack of a better term, they have even more impact. And, I think that again gets us back to the conversation about how the races are raced. The fact that they're fueling properly means they can race start to finish, whereas previously they were sort of, limited to take it easy at the start so that they could go harder at the finish. It's to a certain extent they can just go hard throughout these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another interesting point about the 2019 race was that it took quite a while for the break to go. And that 2019 race, after the first 100 kilometers, they were several minutes up on the fastest expected time check. So they were riding as hard as they could from the start. They were just chasing down attacks left, right, and centre, which is why, again, another reason why I thought, well, you can sort of compare them a little bit. And again, it's food for thought for the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, certainly. If we get back to the equipment for a second, though, I mean, the clickbait, the reaction that a lot of people would have had, the reaction I've seen to this post and this stat that you come up with, and if I'm honest, the reaction I fear that will be happening inside the UCI is that this is all due to the aero advancements of late. Did any part of you hesitate in making that post because it might be taken that way?
A little bit, but I thought it was probably better to, as a real stat, to have the conversation. I mean, that's the perks of hiding behind an anonymous account. You can have people have that and just not engage, and it doesn't really, there are no consequences, or minimal consequences. So I figured, why the hell not? Yeah,
you're kind of straying into the daily battle I have to manage myself. There's that, was it F. Scott Fitzgerald, the quote that the test of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. I've heard that referred to for journalists, and I certainly, while I by no means claim first-rate intelligence, certainly you could apply that to what we have to do here. And so, yeah, I feel you on that one. Well, folks, just a quick interruption here before we get into the show with CyclingSpy to remind you that Performance Process is a members-only podcast. If you're not yet a member, I'm going to put this quite blunt. It's memberships that fund the Performance Process podcast, and having the Spy on here, there are now 2 people to pay to make this show happen. And so if you want to continue hearing from the Spy, please do consider signing up. Not only will you get to hear the episodes in their entirety, but you'll also be ensuring that they actually just continue to happen. Gilbert's 2019 win, well and truly written off now, given that he would be outside the time limit these days. Joking aside, I mean, sticking with the spring classics, the cobbled, the Paris-Roubaix theme, have you ever studied like cobbled aero? And I'm kind of wondering, like, what's the likely effect of all that shaking? Does it cancel out any aerodynamics? Does it potentially enhance aerodynamics? What are we looking at?
I think you probably could study it. I haven't. But in some of the testing that's been done recently, the number of sensors they're putting on the bikes on the Roubaix sectors for testing at the beginning of the year and at the end of each season, I suspect some teams have probably done it. The thing that I think about is that the cobbles probably don't make that much of a difference, because it's about sort of the timescales of how quickly the flow is moving from the front to the back of the rider versus how quickly you're moving up and down, and what that difference in sort of almost refresh rate is. Because if you hit a cobblestone and say move up by 5 centimeters every couple tenths of a second, is that frequency or is that flow moving up and down more quickly than it is moving from the front to back of the arm? Say if your arm is 10 centimeters wide. So how quickly does the flow move from the front to back about 10 centimeters versus how quickly does your arm move up and down? And I would say that actually at the speed of 50k an hour that they're riding over the cobbles, the flows hit the front of the arm and separated off the back of it before you've moved halfway up a cobblestone. So the effect on transition that the cobblestone will have will probably be near to negligible. I might be wrong, and there might be other aspects that it influences, but especially once you start using the arms and legs as a suspension system and separate the bike from the body. You look at Van der Poel as he was riding over the cobbles, and his upper body was so smooth in comparison to how much his bike was bouncing around up and down and left and right. But I think all of that combined, the frequency of the up and down over the cobbles is probably going to have a minimal impact to the flow structures over the rider, at least. Around some of the stuff like the frame, when actually your front to back scale lengths are much smaller, so a fork that's maybe a few centimeters long versus the few centimeters that it's bouncing up and down over the cobbles, potentially there's a separation sort of effect, but I'd probably say that would increase the mixing around all of the components on the bike frame, possibly make the aero a little bit more stable. But my gut feeling is that the effect is going to be negligible.
So it sounds like, rider aero, if you were to guesstimate, so to speak, perhaps less influenced. Frame aero, component aero, perhaps there is something going on there.
Possibly something, but the noise you would introduce into the measurements by trying to measure it probably swallow any difference in drag between setups that you might be able to observe. So it's probably not worth trying to investigate with some of the testing methods we've got at the moment, but some teams might be trying it. There might be something there, but I'm not aware of it yet.
It is interesting though, because you mentioned teams testing and some of the devices and that they're fitting to their bikes for these Roubaix tests, both in the winter and in the week before the race. Have you any idea what the teams are looking at there, what they're measuring? I'll ask them questions and I usually get fairly vague answers, and sometimes we can attend these recon days and you get there and then they very much are just like recon days, and the actual testing has all been done in November and December, and funnily enough we never get invited to those days. Do you have any idea what they might be looking at there, what they might be testing, what they're finding?
Your kid bike trailers, apparently.
For those who didn't see it, do you want to quickly explain why you're mentioning kid bike trailers? It's not the latest marginal gain. Well, maybe it is for training.
Yeah, so someone messaged in with something that was mounted on the back of Tish Benutz's bike, and I didn't know what it was. I don't have kids. I mean, it narrows down who I am, but I mean, not by that much. It means I'm not damn big. So, yeah, and I didn't know what it was. So I just asked the question on Instagram stories, because stories disappear after a certain amount of time. They don't disappear quickly enough because I think maybe I had 300 replies saying it was Tish Benut takes his kid to school in that. It's a trailer attachment. And then the next day, Tish tagged me in a post. Yeah. So,
well,
yeah. They're not testing that on the Roubaix cobbles because Tish wasn't riding it.
If it's any consolation to you and to ensure that the mystery remains, I have 2 kids and I also didn't recognize what it was. So
yeah, lots of people. There was a split. I had lots of engineers message and say, could it be a mount for a camera or a sensor or something? And then non-engineers who live in the real world. I think this is a lesson for all of us to take away, and don't read into things too much.
I mean, like, do you expect one of the world's best riders to turn up to a Roubaix recon with a bike trailer mount on his race bike? Probably not his actual.
I mean, if I'd have paid attention, Tish wasn't racing Roubaix and wasn't on the recon, so if I'd been paying attention, I would have realised that.
Well, I really should have noticed that. Yeah, I was at the race and didn't notice that.
But the question was basically like, what sensors and things are they using? I mean, there's tire pressure sensors, there's vibration mounts. You've got accelerometers on various bits of the bike, so that when you're testing, either you're changing tire sizes and setting for pressure, or setting for hoop stresses, measuring the essentially vertical acceleration on the bike to see, well, actually, what is the optimal tire pressure, tire width to ride at. So I saw quite a few of those sensors. I think the sensors that Red Bull, Bora Hansgrohe were using, they had a few sensors on a couple places on the bike with what looked like either battery unit or a data logger where on the bottle cage mount. But I guess that would be a bunch of accelerometers. It looked like they were using an aero sensor as well.
So I'm actually pretty familiar with the setup they were using there. That's Streamline's Cirrus drag measurement system. And so the pitot tube aero sensor at the front is their Alto Stratos.
Yeah.
The phone, it's actually just a phone on the bottle cage, is what they use for a data logger. And actually, John Buckley from Streamlines has been on this podcast a few weeks or a few months back, just explaining everything that's going on there. But that's a system I've been using for tire testing of the late also. So when it popped up and seen Red Bull, Bora Hansgrohe using it, I was like, oh, I recognize that. But they had another mount, it looked like a battery pack or something, or potentially like gyroscopes or like accelerometers or whatever. I don't know, but on the seat tube bottle cage mount, they had another device of some sorts that with wires running from it all over the frame, and I wasn't aware or wasn't familiar with that one at all.
Yeah, I can only guess what they were for, but that was my guess was the same as yours: accelerometers or gyroscopes, something to look at vertical deflection. Bit of guess as to how much energy loss is being reduced by different tire widths and pressures and various other components they might be trialing.
Have you ever looked into ways of measuring surface roughness or anything like that on varying roads, or that? It's something I'm struggling with at the moment, quantifying how smooth or how rough is a road, or a cobbled stretch in this case.
In motorsports, they are scanning tarmacs and things to look at tire interactions, but tires are so difficult to understand. I mean, just universally, there's not just like a cycling aero related thing. There's everyone has struggled with tires for as long as people have known about tires. So, characterizing roughness and how tires interact with it, I don't know how some people are doing it. That is definitely beyond my area of expertise. So all I know is that I struggle with it, but I know that others struggle with it too, so it doesn't make me feel too bad. But it is completely overwhelming.
Yeah, certainly. I've heard that referenced throughout different sports, and that how much of just a dark art that the tires really are, and nobody really truly understands them. One fellow who does truly understand racing on these roads, at least, is Mathieu van der Poel, who, at least in terms of monuments so far, is 2 out of 3. And so you could argue he's been the best rider of the spring, although Pogačar may say different. One message I kept getting throughout the classics was Mathieu van der Poel has none of the aero, but all of the speed. WTF? ? And I think it's a good point, because on the face of it, at least, he's not really, he's got a lot of shoulders going on there. Looks incredibly strong. He sometimes shows up with aero overshoes, but that's kind of as far as it seems to go. What are you saying about Van der Poel, or how can you answer this seemingly contradictory phenomenon that is Van der Poel in the aero age?
Well, 400 watt, just cruising at 400 watts helps. But I don't think it's not like he's not aero. I say on Roubaix, he was using aero overshoes. He's got a good skin suit. He's using an aero helmet, even though it might be the previous version rather than the newest version. But I think a big thing, and I don't know whether it's a cyclocross background thing, but looking throughout the race, he was able to stay in either relatively low position on the hoods or in the drops, for most of the race. Whereas Pogačar, especially when you compared them, his position is much shorter, or has gotten a lot shorter over the last couple of years, and that has forced his torso to be more upright. Mm-hmm. He was more upright for more of the race, and as he fatigued, only became slightly more upright. Whereas Van der Poel he had a position that he could ride in all day up nearly 400 watts. So I think there's some of that in there, that he's not Taco van der Hoorn levels of sort of position optimized, equipment optimized, but I don't think it's not like he's ignoring all of the tricks. He uses the overshoes, he's got the skin suit.
Yeah, it seems like almost the aero overshoes are an indication of how seriously he's taking the race, because they came out for San Remo and they came out for Roubaix. I can't remember if they came out for Flanders or not, but you mentioned also his helmet there. Do you think have you any idea why he's using the previous generation? Might that be that they've tested it and actually that helmet works best for him?
I know that Alpecin have tested these things before. I don't know whether they've tested that helmet or not. I had a couple people message to say that, or actually, they much prefer the comfort of the old one to the new one. But other people saying they prefer the comfort of the new one compared to the old one. So it might be that on Mathieu, they test aero-wise no different, and he just prefers the comfort of the old one. I don't think we will know, and I don't think it's not the sort of thing that when he retires he'd tell freely, because he's probably not interested in that question, in that level of detail from us. But I can only imagine that either makes no difference or makes little enough difference that he's happy enough with the old one. And also, as an aside, the Van der Poel overshoes is the modern tech. We've ruined the sport version of Kaylee's, Tom Boonen's arm warmers and leg warmers. The leg warmers will come off for Flanders and Roubaix, and with Van der Poel, the overshoes come out for Flanders and Roubaix. Maybe that takes us back to the Gilbert outside time limit discussion of is this where at the point we've gotten to where the seriousness of a race is determined by if you're wearing overshoes or not.
There's a team that seemingly we can't draw any conclusions about how seriously they're taking a race based on their overshoes, and that's Lidl or Lidl Trek, depending on how you pronounce it, because they seem to be all in on the gains. And one example is they seem to be wearing overshoes all the time. It's something I've noticed for a while now, but they're also even riders who, without being unfair to them, who I might expect to be more traditional or hard and fast in their ways, like Mads Pedersen or Jasper Stuyven or some of the big names there, seem to be all in, and happily so, on aero. Is that something you'd noticed, or had you?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's been going for a couple of years because I'm not sure if it stems from it, but with Bontrager not making a TT helmet and the riders having free choice, I think that naturally raises the question, what is the fastest? Because I have options, what is the fastest choice? Once you start going down that road, as me and you both well know, you don't stop asking questions. Once you've asked that first question, that list of things you want to test and answer only gets longer, especially if the teams can run wind tunnel sessions or field testing sessions in a way that isn't super uninteresting for the riders. And if they actually gain performance from it, then they will be keen to come back and test these things like overshoes and skin suits and helmets and glasses and gloves and all stuff like that.
I mean, the overshoes is an obvious one, though, and some of the riders seem to be wearing white overshoes and others seem to be wearing black. The white ones, from as best as I can tell, sort of seem to have that ribbed structure on them. The black seem more like a sort of rainproof version of an aero overshoe that a lot of other teams seem to employ as aero overshoes. But I'm sort of wondering, though, is an aero overshoe actually the fastest setup, or might, like we've seen Pogačar do in the past, running something like a velo toes with an aero sock actually be better? I'm wondering if you ever looked into anything like that.
And there are interesting things that happen with the ankle, with the flow as it rolls up and over the shoe, especially if you start looking at like laces versus boa dials under overshoes and things, and how sort of the flow structure rolls up, hits the ankle, and then separates around the ankle and the back of the leg. That goes into the big bucket of things we don't understand. But there's something happening there. And I think depending on how the fabrics have been cut to assemble the overshoe versus what an aero sock looks like and a velo toes overshoe, and I think it depends on what your sponsor is as to how they make their overshoes versus how they make their socks, and as to what might end up being faster. There's probably a way we could design an overshoe that would always be the fastest, and it's going to be looking at that, what is happening around the ankle. But at the moment, we don't quite understand. So there's test the different options and pick what's fastest.
And it's not something I've heard mentioned before, and we're potentially straying into a different genre here, but are ankles individual? Do ankles differ from rider to rider? The reason I ask is because I know that actually the ankles in a pedaling mannequin for wind tunnel testing are one of the most challenging areas to get right. And I'm wondering, can you get them right, or is it something like head and shoulder interaction? It's just going to be different for every rider.
I mean, the pedaling style is different on each rider. Some riders are very toe down, which seem to be getting more prevalent as the saddle positions get further and further over the bottom bracket. But some have their heels up, and it goes back into a question. I think I've been asked this a couple of times as well, in sort of, should you be covering up cleats or the speed play aero cleats? And actually pedaling style influences that. I can well imagine that your foot angle compared to the horizontal plane versus your legs and all of that stuff would probably have an effect. What it is, I don't know, but I'm keen to try and find out. And there probably is something there. And it's probably not tiny to be looking at. It's probably not a tiny 0.3 or 0.5% gain. It's my, based on experience, tells me there's probably something worth looking at there.
Yeah, I mean, you should never speculate when it comes to aero, but in my mind, at least, it seems like a high heel toe down foot angle could be very slow because you're just exposing more of the foot to the flow, whereas a flat-footed pedaling style might actually be, at least in terms of aero, a faster option.
I've never tested it. I don't know. Depends what shoe you're riding, like what size shoe you've got. I don't know. That can just be thrown into the big bucket of it depends, and we'll get round to testing it when it becomes more interesting.
Getting back to Van der Poel, there's two other things we do need to discuss. All right, folks, Ronan here again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but if you're not yet an Escape Collective member, I'm sorry to say that's all you've got for this episode. There's still plenty more, some of the most interesting stuff to hear from the Spy coming up in the second half of the show. But yeah, it's for Escape Collective members only. So if you're not yet a member, head over to escapecollective.com/join today to sign up and not be interrupted by me and not miss out on the second half of these episodes to come.